I always believed Evan and I had a strong marriage, or at least strong enough to withstand the turbulence of raising a 6-year-old while juggling full-time jobs. But looking back now, I realize the small signs had been piling up for months, late nights at work, whispered phone calls behind the laundry room door, and that distant look in his eyes whenever I tried to talk about anything deeper than grocery lists. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the morning. I woke up and he was simply gone. His phone was off, his car missing, and there wasn't a single note explaining where he'd gone or why. At first, I tried to stay calm for Lily's sake, plastering a smile on my face as I poured her cereal, pretending nothing was wrong. She watched me, with those big brown eyes of hers, sensing more than I wanted her to. The silence of the house felt heavier than usual, pressing on my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I kept checking the driveway, waiting for headlights to appear, or for my phone to buzz with a familiar message that never came. By noon, my hands were shaking, and my mind was spiraling with every possible scenario. I called Evan's phone 5 times before leaving a voicemail that sounded more desperate than I intended. I even drove to his office, only to find out he hadn't shown up there either. His coworker gave me a sympathetic look and said he'd been off the past few weeks, which only made the panic claw deeper into my stomach. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat on the couch in the dim glow of the lamp, staring at the front door as though I could will him to walk through it. Every creak of the house made my heart jump. I debated calling the police, wondering if they would take a grown man's disappearance seriously or tell me he'd probably just needed space. The not knowing was the part that gnawed at me, an ache that grew sharper with every silent hour. By the morning of the second day, the fear had shifted into something more unsettling, a mixture of anger, humiliation, and dread. The neighbors had started to notice Evan's absence, offering tight smiles as they asked how things were going. I felt exposed, like the perfect family image we'd worked so hard to maintain was cracking right in front of them. Worst of all, Lily kept asking when Daddy would be home, her voice trembling with confusion each time I said I didn't know. When I finally called the police for a wellness check, my voice was so tight it barely sounded like my own. The officer who arrived was kind, but his questions felt like daggers. Any marital issues? Money problems? Has he ever left before? Each one hit harder than the last, forcing me to admit how much distance had grown between us. As he left, he told me they'd notify me if anything came up, but the lack of urgency in his tone terrified me. As night fell again, I walked into Lily's room to check on her, needing the comfort of her steady breathing to keep myself grounded. She rolled over, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly, and mumbled, "Mommy, is Daddy mad at us?" The innocence in her voice cracked something inside me. I sat on the edge of her bed, stroking her hair, promising that everything would be okay, even though I no longer believed it. Then, sometime just after midnight, headlights finally swept across the living room curtains. I shot up from the couch, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pulled the door open before Evan even reached it, and the sight of him standing there made my breath catch. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and he looked exhausted in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. He didn't say a word at first, just stepped inside and shut the door quietly behind him. The air between us felt electric, charged with questions, explanations, and something else I couldn't place. His voice was low and strained when he finally murmured, "Nat, I'm sorry. I'll explain everything." But the hollow tone in his words sent a chill through me, like he was preparing me for something I wasn't ready to hear. Before I could respond, Lily's small voice drifted from the hallway. "Daddy, why were you with that lady?" And in that instant, my blood ran cold. Lily's question hung in the air like a thunderclap, freezing both Evan and me in place. His head snapped toward her, eyes wide and face draining of color, as though she had spoken forbidden words he never expected to hear out loud. I could practically hear his heartbeat from across the room, each thud a silent admission he was trying desperately to swallow. My stomach twisted painfully as I knelt beside Lily, gently asking her what she meant while keeping my gaze locked on Evan, watching every twitch of his expression. Lily rubbed her sleepy eyes, looking confused but earnest. "The lady you talked to in the parking lot," she murmured, leaning against my shoulder for balance. "She said she'd see you later." You hugged her. The words were so innocent, spoken without any understanding of the emotional grenade she had just lobbed into the room. Evan's jaw tightened, and I saw the moment he realized he could no longer hide behind vague explanations or emotional fog. I stood slowly, feeling a strange calm settle over me, a stillness born of shock rather than understanding. Evan stepped forward, his voice trembling as he said, "Nat, it's not what you think." Lily misunderstood. But the way he avoided my eyes told me he didn't even believe himself. His hands shook slightly, the way they always did when he was cornered, and something about that small detail made my chest tighten. "What lady, Evan?" I asked, keeping my tone level even though my legs felt like they might give out. "And why would Lily say that if nothing happened?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again, fumbling for words that wouldn't come. Watching him struggle felt like watching a stranger wear my husband's face, a man I no longer recognized. Lily stared between us, confused and scared, and I forced myself to stay calm for her sake. He finally managed to mutter, "It was a coworker. She needed help with something. That's all." His explanation was thin, threadbare, like he was patching holes faster than he could sew them shut. A muscle twitched in his cheek, betraying the lie in a way he must have forgotten I knew how to read. My pulse thudded painfully in my ears as I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice so Lily wouldn't hear the tremor in it. "2 days, Evan," I whispered. 2 days gone. Not a call, not a message. And now a woman my daughter saw you hug? He flinched at the intensity of my stare, shrinking into himself the way he always did when guilt crept in. Instead of answering, he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. For a brief moment, I saw fear, not fear of me, but fear of the truth finally unraveling in front of us. I gently guided Lily back to bed, trying to steady my breathing as she clung to my arm. She whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" And the heartbreak in her voice nearly brought me to my knees. I kissed her forehead and assured her she did nothing wrong, that Mommy and Daddy just needed to talk. When I finally closed her bedroom door, a wave of dread washed over me so strong I had to steady myself against the wall. In the silence of the hallway, I gathered every bit of courage I had before returning to the living room. Evan looked smaller somehow, hunched over like the weight of 2 days had finally crushed him. "You owe me the truth," I said softly but firmly, sitting across from him. "No more half-stories, no more disappearing. I need the truth, Evan." My voice wavered at the end, a tremor of vulnerability I couldn't hide. He looked up at me then, eyes bloodshot and terrified. "Nat, I can't explain everything yet," he said, voice cracking. "But I swear, it's not what you think." That sentence, those exact words were the same ones my father used just before the truth about his own betrayal came out years ago. The familiarity of it sent a cold shiver down my spine. But there was something worse. I realized he wasn't just hiding a woman, he was hiding something bigger, heavier, and far more dangerous than an affair. The next morning, after a long night of silence and distance between us, I noticed new details I had missed in the chaos. Evan's clothes smelled faintly of smoke. Not cigarette smoke, but the acrid, metallic scent of something burned. There were scratches on his wrist he tried to hide, and a bruise forming near his collarbone. When I asked him where they came from, he stiffened instantly, eyes darting away from mine as if calculating what lie would be safest to tell. And Lily, sweet, observant Lily, added one more detail that made my skin crawl. At breakfast, she innocently mentioned, "Daddy told the lady he was scared." That was the moment the bottom dropped out of my world. I couldn't shake Lily's words from my mind. "Daddy told the lady he was scared." The sentence repeated in my thoughts like a haunting refrain, growing heavier every time I tried to make sense of it. If Evan had been afraid, then whatever he had been hiding wasn't just emotional distance or a coworker getting too close. Something deeper lurked beneath the surface. Something that didn't fit the usual patterns of betrayal I had been bracing myself for. Still, the gnawing ache of distrust pulled me forward, pushing me to uncover whatever truth he was refusing to give. While Evan took a shower that morning, I stood outside the bathroom door, listening to his uneven breathing. It wasn't the casual hum or absent-minded whistling he used to do. This was labored, shaky, like his nerves were frayed to their last thread. I found myself pacing, running my fingers through my hair as fear and suspicion collided inside my chest. I knew if I didn't look for answers myself, I would drown in the possibilities. So I waited for the water to stop before quietly slipping into the bedroom he'd left in disarray the night before. Evan's phone sat plugged in on the nightstand, screen glowing faintly with a fresh notification banner. For a moment, I hesitated, feeling the heavy weight of the boundary I was about to cross. But then I remembered the hollow excuses, the 2 days missing, the bruise on his collarbone, and Lily's frightened eyes. I unlocked it. He had never changed the password and immediately saw a thread of messages from an unsaved number. My hands trembled as I opened them, half prepared for flirty comments or emotional confessions. Instead, the messages were panicked. Evan, did anyone follow you? You need to stay quiet about the fire. Do not tell your wife. We're not safe yet. My breath left my body all at once, a cold rush of dread sweeping down my spine. The messages didn't hint at romance, they hinted at danger. Fire. Someone following him. Not safe. The pieces didn't align with any scenario I had imagined during those 2 agonizing days he was gone. Whatever he was tangled in, it was far more serious than sneaking around with a coworker. I scrolled further and found a photo blurred. Nighttime. Something engulfed in flames. My heart hammered painfully as I zoomed in and realized it was a car, burning violently in what looked like an abandoned lot or industrial area. The edges of the image captured silhouettes, 2 figures standing near the fire. One of them, unmistakably, was Evan. My knees weakened at the sight, and I had to sit on the edge of the bed before my body gave out completely. The bathroom door clicked open, and I quickly locked the phone, forcing myself to breathe normally as Evan stepped into the room. His eyes scanned me briefly, suspicion flickering across his features the way guilt flickered in mine. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes deep enough to suggest he hadn't slept since he disappeared. Nat, we need to talk, he said softly, but there was a tremor in his voice that told me he wasn't ready to confess anything real. Not yet. I studied him for a moment, his tense jaw, his distracted gaze, the way he kept touching his wrist as though checking for a pulse. He looked trapped, cornered by something he couldn't outrun, and the sight of it filled me with equal parts fear and anger. Then talk, I told him, keeping my tone steady. Tell me where you were. Tell me why you disappeared. Tell me why our daughter saw you with a woman. Each question made him flinch, as though I had physically struck him. But he didn't answer. He only whispered, "It's complicated," before turning away. That was the moment I realized I could no longer wait for him to come clean. I had to find the truth myself. Later that afternoon, after dropping Lily at my sister's house under the guise of a fun sleepover, I drove toward the location tagged in the messages I had memorized earlier. My heart thudded uncontrollably as I followed the route out of town, passing the grocery stores, the quiet neighborhoods, and the familiar streets where I once believed my life was stable. Eventually, the road narrowed, and the scenery shifted into old warehouses and half-abandoned lots. The GPS guided me deeper into an industrial area I hadn't visited since my early 20s. I parked near a chain-link fence, where scorched asphalt formed a blackened circle of char around a large patch of ground. The smell of burned rubber still lingered faintly in the air, sharp and acrid, pulling a fresh wave of nausea through me. This was the place from the photo, there was no doubt. I stepped out of the car cautiously, the wind whipping strands of hair across my face as I tried to steady my racing thoughts. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I approached the charred area, and a sense of dread thickened with each step. That was when I noticed a small, partially burned item half buried near the edge of the scorched circle. I crouched down and carefully pulled it free, brushing away soot until the object revealed itself. It was Lily's missing hair clip. The moment I recognized Lily's pink butterfly hair clip burned around the edges, but unmistakably hers, I felt the world tilt beneath me. My breath hitched, and for several seconds I just stared at it, unable to comprehend how something belonging to my daughter ended up in the center of what looked like a crime scene. A cold wave of fear surged through me, eclipsing every theory I'd formed so far. Had Evan brought her here? Had she been in the car? The questions came so fast, they tangled together, making it hard to breathe. My hands trembled as I stood, clutching the clip so tightly the metal pressed into my palm. The sky overhead was gray, thick clouds rolling in like a warning of the emotional storm brewing inside me. I tried to steady myself as I scanned the area, looking for any other clues, any sign that this nightmare wasn't as bad as it now appeared. But the silence of the abandoned lot only amplified the dread clawing at my chest. I felt like an intruder in a world Evan had tried desperately to keep hidden from me. As I forced myself back toward the car, my phone vibrated violently in my pocket. When I saw Evan's name flashing across the screen, a sickening mixture of fury and panic rose inside me. I answered, but my voice was hollow when I said, "What did you do?" There was a pause on the other end, a heavy, suffocating pause that told me he already knew exactly where I was and exactly what I had found. His breath wavered, and in that moment, everything between us shifted, turning into something raw and irreversible. "Natalie, please," he finally whispered. "You shouldn't be there." His voice cracked on the last word, and I felt my heart stutter with a terrifying realization. This wasn't guilt anymore. This was fear, real, urgent, bone-deep fear. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, fury bubbling beneath my skin. "Where was Lily, Evan?" I demanded, each word sharp as glass. "Tell me right now." He exhaled shakily, and I could almost picture him rubbing his temples the way he always did when cornered. "She wasn't with me during the fire," he insisted. "She wasn't in the car. She wasn't anywhere near there." His voice rose with desperation, like he needed me to believe him to survive. But all I could think about was the hair clip in my hand burned, half melted, and impossible to explain away. "That's not enough," I said, feeling my throat tighten with emotion. "You disappeared for 2 days, and our daughter somehow lost this here?" My voice cracked, tears clouding my vision. "Evan, what the hell did you drag us into?" On the other end, he choked back something that sounded dangerously close to a sob. But I had no sympathy left, not until I had the truth, not until he earned it. After a long silence, Evan finally said, "Come home. I'll explain everything. I promise." His words were soft, trembling, and exhausted, carrying a weight that made my chest constrict. But the truth was, I wasn't sure whether going home meant safety or stepping into the heart of something far worse. Still, for Lily's sake and my own sanity, I needed answers, so I drove back, heart pounding the entire way. When I walked into the house, Evan was pacing the living room, running both hands through his hair in frantic motions. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements jittery, like he hadn't slept or eaten in days. The moment he saw the hair clip in my hand, his knees nearly buckled. "Nat, God, I'm so sorry," he whispered, reaching out as though the small object physically pained him. "Start talking," I said, keeping my distance. "No lies, not one more." My tone left no room for negotiation, and he knew it. Evan swallowed hard and sank onto the couch like the truth itself was crushing him. For a moment, he stared at the floor, gathering pieces of courage from somewhere deep within a place he had clearly avoided for too long. Finally, he looked up and said, "It wasn't an accident." The room tilted. He took a shaky breath. "The fire, the woman Lily saw, the disappearances, all of it. I wasn't running from you, Nat. I was running from them." That single sentence sliced straight through me, chilling the air. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands buried in his hair. "The woman isn't a coworker. Her name is Mara. She's connected to something I should have never gotten involved in." His voice shook violently as he continued, revealing a dangerous secret he had carried alone for far too long. He had witnessed something illicit, illegal enough, that someone set a car on fire to destroy evidence, and he had been pulled into the aftermath. "And Lily's clip?" I asked, unable to breathe until he answered. He looked up at me with pure anguish. "She dropped it in my coat pocket days ago. Mara must have taken it when she searched my things." His explanation didn't soothe me, it terrified me even more, because it meant someone had been close enough to notice Lily existed, and that meant someone dangerous knew exactly where to find us. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Evan's confession hung in the air like smoke, thick, suffocating, and impossible to ignore. My mind raced through everything Lily had said, every odd detail I had brushed off, every uneasy feeling I had chalked up to stress. Now, all of it clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Someone had been watching us, circling our lives like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. I lowered myself into the chair across from him, gripping the arms until my knuckles whitened. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "that a woman who burned a car, who's part of something criminal, knows about our daughter?" The words trembled as they left my mouth, fear threading through every syllable. Evan nodded, his face pale, his shoulders hunched as if he'd been carrying this weight for far too long. "She thinks I took something from them, something valuable. I tried to walk away, Nat, but they don't let people walk away." My stomach tightened at the implication. "What did you take?" I asked, my voice sharper now, cutting through the haze of fear. Evan winced, pressing both hands against his face before answering. "Proof," he said quietly. "A recording. Something that could ruin them." My pulse kicked into overdrive. He hadn't just stumbled into something dangerous, he had become a threat to them. And by extension, so had we. A heavy silence settled between us as I tried to steady my breathing. The walls of our living room felt smaller than they ever had, as though the danger outside was pressing inward, closing the distance inch by inch. I thought of Lily upstairs, her little nightlight glowing like a fragile guardian against the dark. The realization hit me with full force. "We can't stay here," I said. "Not another minute." Evan nodded vigorously, as if he'd been waiting for me to say those exact words. "I know," he whispered. "I already packed a bag for Lily. I didn't know how to tell you without losing you." He looked up at me, with eyes so broken they almost undid me, but fear gripped me too tightly to offer comfort. "This isn't about us right now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about keeping her safe." Before either of us could say more, a faint creak echoed from the front porch. Evan shot to his feet instantly, all color draining from his face. I froze, my heart slamming painfully against my ribs as we both turned toward the door. The air thickened with dread, and every instinct in my body screamed that we were no longer alone. Evan moved slowly toward the window, lifting the curtain just enough to peer outside. His breath caught. "They're here." The words were barely audible, but they shattered everything. I stood quickly, adrenaline flooding my limbs. "Get Lily," I whispered urgently. Evan didn't hesitate. He sprinted up the stairs while I grabbed my phone and backed toward the kitchen. A shadow passed across the frosted glass of the front door, followed by a soft, deliberate knock that made my skin crawl. Whoever stood there wasn't a stranger asking for help. They were expecting us. I dialed 911 with trembling hands, whispering our address and the few details I had before hanging up, afraid the sound would give me away. Then Evan reappeared with Lily, still half asleep, her arms wrapped around his neck. Her eyes landed on me, confused and frightened. "Mommy?" she whispered. I forced a smile I didn't feel. "It's okay, baby. We're going on a little trip." We headed toward the back door, Evan clutching Lily tightly while I grabbed the small bag he'd packed. But before we could slip out, a voice came from the front porch, clear, calm, and chilling. "Evan?" the woman called. "We just want to talk." My blood turned to ice. It was the same voice Lily had mentioned, the woman from the fire, Mara. Evan shook his head, whispering, "Don't respond." We moved quietly through the kitchen, but another knock echoed through the house. This one, at the back door. My breath stilled. They had us surrounded. Evan and I exchanged a look, fear and defiance mixing in equal measure. This wasn't random. This wasn't a scare tactic. They wanted something, and they wanted it now. Suddenly, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, faster, closer. Mara cursed from the front porch, her voice suddenly sharp and furious. "You made a mistake, Evan," she shouted. "This isn't over." Footsteps pounded across the porch, then faded as the group retreated toward a vehicle. Within seconds, a car tore away from the curb, tires screeching. When the police finally arrived, the house felt unbearably silent. Evan sank onto the floor, pulling Lily into his lap and holding her as though he might never let go. I leaned against the wall, shaking from head to toe, the magnitude of what nearly happened settling heavily on my shoulders. But beneath the terror, something else pulsed, a fierce, protective anger, an awakening. Because they weren't the only ones who wanted answers now. They had come to our home, they had threatened our family, and they had made one monumental mistake. They underestimated me.